Hello, friends. I've not been faithful to keep putting things on God's Grace Keeps Pace. And I just shared a story today on my wall, Pam Whitley Taylor, but I thought I would video this story for you guys on God's Grace Keeps Pace. And so today is my friend Ginger Marshall LaCroix's birthday. She passed away, I think it was in November of last year, but this is her first heavenly birthday. And I'm kind of missing her today. She always said, it's my birthday when it's 6 months to Christmas because her birthday's halfway to Christmas. So, hey, we're only 6 months from Christmas, folks. But I miss Ginger, and this is a story I wrote about her, and it's from the 90s, but or the where the story takes place. But it was something that was so dear to my heart. I think it blessed her too. And picture us as two young women, probably in our 40s, and we're meeting for lunch. And this is how the story goes. As a caregiver to our critical care multiple handicapped daughter, Jan, 1993 ranks up there as one of the hardest years of my life. But God taught me and Ginger about himself, and I think it was just an incredible way. On December the 27th of 92, my husband and I had taken Jan, who was 14 years at the time, to Children's Hospital for an orthopedics visit. She'd been very irritable for several days since she could not tell us where it hurt. Every time she was sick or you could tell she felt bad, we had to just go through a process of elimination. Like one time she had an abscessed tooth. She was crying and she was running fever. And, we took her to a regular doctor. He couldn't find anything. And finally, I narrowed it down to a dentist, and she had an abscessed tooth. And because she couldn't use her hands, so she couldn't point or tell you anything about where she hurt. So, anyway, at this point, she was pulling her leg up involuntarily. It was just coming up. I knew something was wrong after Jan was x-rayed. The doctor sat us down in a small room. It always seemed like they sat us in a small room. And he looked at us in the eyes and he said, the good news is it isn't Jan's hip or her leg. The bad news is it's her spine. He explained that in the fall of 1991, when Jan was last x-rayed, the S curve in her spine, which was caused by her cerebral palsy, was a 50-degree curve. And by 92, it was an 83-degree curve, which was her spine went like this. If it continues to progress, and I believe it will, said the doctor, it will eventually lead to her demise because it'll compromise her organs and she won't be able to breathe. We could do surgery, but it's a major procedure. And given Jan's many problems, I can almost guarantee you that she would have serious complications. That is, if she even survived the surgery. He elaborated on the details of putting that long rod down her back. And we knew with what he told us, we couldn't put Jan through that agony. I, I wondered what she would go through without that surgery, though. We drove home feeling rather numb. It wasn't that we were afraid for Jan to die. It was that we had just seen her endure tremendous suffering in the summer of 1991. She was in the hospital for, over 50 days. Now she was 20 pounds heavier, and she was hard to manage 20 pounds lighter. So I didn't know because she was like a baby. So you held her like a baby, but she was full size first little person. So that diagnosis, coupled with several other factors, plunged me into the deepest depression of my life. I already was extremely fatigued, and I'm sure that was one of the factors. Our son was a freshman in college, so emptiness was real. Those things, coupled with the news, left me I can remember it right now. It felt like I had fallen into deep waters and I could see the surface, but I couldn't quite reach the surface to get out of the water. And I could just see the glimmer of the light up there, but I couldn't get to it and I was drowning. I was overwhelmed with despair, and never had I felt so alone. No one can understand how I feel, I told myself, because no one has walked in my shoes. I'm not proud of that pity party that I was having, but thankfully, God loved me through it. I didn't feel I could share my deep despair with Mike, my late husband. He had a heavy workload. He was self-employed as an engineer in the oil field, and he worked long hours. And I just didn't feel like I could share how stressed I was. In the midst of my big pity party, I don't think anyone could understand my mother's heart anyway, I told myself. I wanted to care for Jan as long as she lived, but I was fast reaching the point where I feared that I couldn't. I already struggled greatly to lift her, and my body ached each time I did. Fear spoke loudly to my mind and not faith, and I listened to the fear. In the midst of that despair, Jan continued to sleep only about 2 to 3 hours a night. When she'd waken me at 3 a.m., I found myself crying out and just praying repeatedly, "Help me, Jesus," because I was drowning. I could no longer physically sit and hold her for the rest of the night as I'd done in all the previous years, because she had just grown too large and I'd grown too old. I couldn't operate on 2 or 3 hours of sleep a day any longer as I had in the past. So I had to make a choice. I'd put Jan in our spare bedroom, put her movie on, usually Little Mermaid. That was her very favorite. And this was on the old VCR. And then I'd go lay down in her room and set a timer. So I'd go and I would sleep in between. When I woke up, I would be praying that same prayer over and over. Help me, Jesus. Help me, Jesus. I no longer knew what else to pray. I felt so totally helpless. I'd set that timer again after I checked on her, and this went on for several weeks. And each night I seemed to get more depressed. I still kept that struggle to myself because I thought, nobody's going to understand this. They can't know how I feel. Then one day, my friend Ginger came by and we went to lunch. Do you know when something major happens in your life? I don't know about you, but I will have a snapshot of it that stays with me forever. I have a snapshot of that day. We're sitting in a corner booth at Mazio's. We're eating salads, and I'm very quiet. I'm just listening. Ginger says, "Pam, I don't know what's wrong with me. I've never had a real bout with depression. In fact, there's nothing going on in my life that I have a reason to be depressed. But I feel this weird despair. I can't even explain it," Ginger said. "It's just a very hopeless feeling. I can tell you, it's awful." I listened carefully, thinking, "No, I do understand because you're describing how I feel." She went on to explain that everything was really going good in her life. She said there is just no reason for me having this depression. She said, "Pam, this depression is so awful. I wake up in the night crying out, 'Help me, Jesus. Help me, Jesus.'" When she said that, I remember just looking at her and I didn't know how, but she was describing exactly how I felt. And she was even praying the identical prayer I was praying. I sat there for a while. Tears started to fall. And as I gained my composure back, I blurted out, "Ginger, I don't understand what's happening here. but I do know what is causing your depression. You have described exactly how I feel and what I'm experiencing. Not only are you experiencing what I'm experiencing, you're praying what I'm praying. Both sat there and looked at each other. We just couldn't believe it. Then Ginger said with a quivering voice, "Oh, Pam, I pray that God would let me help carry your burden." Can you imagine that? It shocked us both. We so underestimate the love of our Father. We hugged each other, knowing that we had just been a part of a miracle. And we recall the scripture that says, "Bear ye one another's burdens." Ginger said she had prayed that prayer and literally asked God to help her to help me carry my burden. I knew He had sent me help. Ginger, I asked, "Do you remember when your depression began?" Looking back at her calendar, you can tell this still is emotional for me. She realized that it started about the time we got the bad news from the doctor. Oh my, what a mighty God we serve. That revelation of God's love and care for me brought me to the service from the drowning depths of my despair. Once again, I could walk in His peace and His joy and trust His heart. And do you know that's the most important thing when we can't trace God's hand, to just trust His heart, because He's a good Father and He loves us with an everlasting love. His plans for us are good. And yes, we do walk through some really hard places. Every one of you listening to this has your own story you could write about the hard places you've been in. He's there. Later, I asked Ginger if that was the end of her despair. For the most part, she said it was. She said that she learned that if that feeling started to come, she needed to pray for me, and she would at that time. I think both of us learned to trust God in a new way from that experience and to take more seriously Philippians 4:13 as truth. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Back to Galatians 6:8-9. Bear one another's burdens. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I don't know what you're going through today, but if you're going through a hard time, just know He is so faithful. It doesn't mean that we won't go through hard times. I mean, He died on a cross. He chose to, but He died on a cross for us. And so our life is not going to be painless or not filled with hard places. It's just that He went before us. He paved the way for us to walk in His peace and in His joy as long as we keep our eyes on Him and on His word. So let me challenge you today, whatever you're going through, you can do this because of the strength that He will give you. You've just got to believe that His word is true. And believe me, He loves you with an everlasting love. Um, God's grace truly does keep pace with whatever we face, even when we start to drown and we think He's not listening. He is, and He will make a way. So I remind myself of this story, and I loved reliving today, that day that I sat in the corner of Mazio's, and I heard those words when I thought I could not continue. I heard those words that made me know my father had seen, and he was letting me know it's going to be all right. So whatever you're going through, reach up for him and it's going to be all right. Thank you for listening. Bye.